So actually, I'll start with just reading. I have a map of the Tanya that I like going through whenever we're starting and attacking a new chapter. So today's chapter, chapter 30, says like this. It's just one line, and it's be humble and consider yourself lower than all, even the wanton sinners, for the intensity of their struggle is greater than your own. That's the title, I guess, for the chapter. If it's okay with everyone, I will just be reading some notes that I typed up about what this chapter is about, including just a little bit of a review, just to bring everyone on board. Chapter 29 was a little bit long, so I just want to bring us back to see where we're up to. And it goes like this. Tanya introduces in chapter 1 the message, the theme of the two souls. We each have the struggle, and the struggle is going on between two souls. So first, what we needed to do is get a deep dive into understanding the biology of these souls. So we started with saying we have the animal soul, and the animal soul is the source of where all of our selfishness comes from. And we have a godly soul. Chapter 2 said the godly soul is the selfless drive to be more godly, to do what God wants. Number 3, then analyze the godly soul, the biology of the godly soul, and the composition of it, that it's made up of chachma, bina, and das. It's made up of our inquiry, our cognition, and our recognition. And then the way that's the soul powers. But the way that communicates to the world is through its thought, speech, and action. That's the outside, the garments of the soul. That was chapter 4. And the garments of the soul can actually take the soul, the godly soul, to a very high place through performance of mitzvahs. And then chapter 5 says, especially through Torah study. Through the study of Torah, it's like the food, the nourishment of the godly soul. It unites the soul deep with God. And then the flip of that would be the animal soul, which is chapter 6. It discusses the animal soul, that it also has these 3 soul powers and the emotions to relate to them. And it also has the garments. And what we do to the world is relating to it, either elevating it to holiness or bringing it down, downgrading it to kalipa. That was the lexicon. Then in chapter 9, we began the battle. That was the war that's at hand. We have the 2 kings at war in a small city. Each of them want total domination. The animal soul versus the godly soul. The godly soul wants the full attention of the person's thought, speech, and action. The animal soul also wants the full attention and domination. So we have 3 types of people. In chapter 10, we said we have a tzaddik. The tzaddik, he always wins the battle. The godly soul is what rules over the body, over his emotions, and over his garments, over his action, his speech, and even the way he thinks. And what he thinks about is totally dominated by the godly soul. That's the tzaddik. Then we had the Rasha, which was the flip opposite. The Rasha is totally dominated by the animal soul. He's weak. He's compromised. He has a fantasy that rises from his mind and goes into his heart, and he acts on it. Even if he tries to stop himself, either from speaking that way, from acting that way, or from allowing that fantasy to be thought about in his mind, it's very hard for him to hold back. Even if he holds back for a week, but it'll come back right after that. He's weakened. He's compromised. That's the Rasha. So just in the description, the Rasha is not that bad of a guy the way we imagine. A Rasha is a wicked person who's out to get the world, robbing banks and conniving. The Rasha is kind of like all of us, that we're weak, we're compromised. We have temptations, and we kind of sometimes give in. But really, the truth is, comes chapter 12, we each have the power to be a Beinani. The Beinani is the hero of our Tanya, the in-betweener, where he struggles. He has thoughts from his mind that arise as a feeling in the heart that is less than holy. But the Beinani has the power to control their emotions. So they have impulses that are popping up, but the Beinani controls them from allowing it to be spoken about. So they don't speak what their heart is feeling. Meaning, even if their heart is feeling something that's very inappropriate, knowing that they shouldn't do it, they have a hate for someone, they don't act on it. They control themselves. It may seem hard, but the Alter Rebbe says try it. In chapter 12, by birth, we each have the power for our mind to control our heart. In Hebrew, the words from the Zohar is moach shalit al halev. The mind rules over the heart. We each have that power. And I gave examples that is not only the holy people that can control themselves. Try it for 5 minutes. You can control yourself. Try it for the next 5 minutes. You could be a Beinoni your whole life, taking it minute by minute. Mind controlling the heart. That was one of the most fundamental lessons of chapter 12, which is the Beinoni, that we have the power of the mind to rule the heart. Then we said that the Beinoni has conflicts and it needs to curb their impulses. That was chapter 13 and 14. Chapter 15 says there's also another type of Beinoni, a Beinoni who the struggle is actually not that intense because he's cold-blooded by nature, which is not literal. It just means he doesn't have a heated passion of running after things. He's more cold. He's more, the example I gave is he's not your passionate Moroccan Sephardi that is very heated, which is by the way, if anyone is Moroccan, don't take it as an insult. It's actually a compliment. It's very healthy to be passionate. It's important. The worry is when you don't have that passion. But if a person has passion, but the passion is towards other things, the Beinoni needs to work on them. But in chapter 15, we were saying that what if you have a Beinoni who controls themselves, but it's actually not that hard. They're a goody-goody. They're nerdy by nature. They're a little more geeky, which is not the terms of the chapter. The Alter Rebbe says he needs to push himself to get out of their comfort zone because being coasting is not a good place to be in. When everything is easy, it's actually a sign of something that's wrong. You need to push yourself. You need to always keep on growing. And the Beinoni needs to put a fire under their rear end to keep on burning themselves to a higher level. That's a Beinoni. Then chapter 16 and 17, it was a kind of a newer topic where it says you can't just work on the outside, our mind's garments, our speech and our action and our thoughts, because eventually it's going to hurt. Always controlling yourself 5 minutes and 5 minutes. Eventually, the example I gave is if you have a rubber band, eventually it's going to snap. How long could you keep on pulling yourself apart and controlling yourself? You need to work on something a little more deep. You have to start working on your emotions, on your feelings inside. Try to change them. But that takes a lifetime. To change an emotion is a lot harder than just to control your speech or to control your action. So the secret to changing an emotion is actually not working on the emotion. The secret to changing an emotion is actually working in the mind, on meditation, because we each know that the emotions are developed from what your mind is throwing to it. It starts with the mind and then it goes to the heart. That's actually why Hashem made us upright, where the head is over the heart, because by nature, what's in the mind then flows into the heart. So in order to change a feeling, you first need to work on the meditation towards it. So 16 and 17 was really working on it. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Let's see where that's coming from.
That was Lou Rappaport.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you. And Lou, if you have a question, you're welcome to unmute yourself, but I wasn't sure if that was on purpose or not. And so chapter 18 was another beautiful idea where in case of emergency, break here. You actually see behind me, you see a fire extinguisher. So in other buildings, a lot of times they have the fire extinguisher or the alarm in a glass container. And chapter 18 through 25 was, if you want to work on your meditation and emotion, that takes a lifetime. But if you're right now stuck and you're feeling uncomfortable because controlling yourself is hard, we need a Band-Aid. We need a quick fix. Chapter 18 through 25 was a quick fix. And that was realizing that you actually don't have to develop anything new. You actually just need to discover what you already have. Uncover the fire, the love for God that's already in your heart. We each know that when a person is faced with a dire situation, they could do something that they never thought was possible. Like a lady who could lift a car because, God forbid, her child is stuck underneath it. You can't call her the next day and say, hey, you're so strong, could you help me move my washing machine? Because it doesn't work that way. It's only with an adrenaline of incredible strength that you don't even know where you found, you're able to do it. So the same is also if a person was attacked for the being Jewish, and God forbid held up at gunpoint and says, renounce your Judaism or I will shoot you, a person will by nature not want to be disconnected from their Judaism. There are exceptions, but for the most part, Jews remained loyal to their faith, even if it meant death. And we know that from too many stories throughout our Jewish history. So what we see is deep down, you have this love for God that is unextinguishable. I don't know if that's a real word, but it can never be extinguished. It can never be burnt out. It's always there. Sometimes what happens is you kind of get routine and realize that God loves me the way I am. So therefore, you kind of forget about that fiery burn that only comes out when you're threatened with being disconnected from God. But if you could realize that really in truth, every sin disconnects you and every mitzvah attaches you, you could actually develop a way that adrenaline rush doesn't only come out when your whole Judaism is on the line. It could come out every day. Whenever you're faced with a challenge, you could uncover a fire that's deeper that can be brought up. That was the main sections, which was in an ideal world, this is a Beinoni. But the problem with that is we don't live in an ideal world. We live in a regular world that is faced with challenges, faced with struggles. And therefore, that's a Beinoni. But what happens if I'm faced with sins and guilt and shame and sadness and hypocrisy that I'm feeling? So chapters 26 through 30, which is what we're going to be discussing today, is talking about troubleshooting method. When things are not going well, when the Beinoni work is kind of being threatened. In chapter 26, the main foundation was we need to work with joy, which is such a general theme throughout Tanya, that joy is not just a nice bonus to our worship, but joy is integral. Joy is a crucial ingredient. Without it, our whole service is lacking. So things that could be bogging down our joy, we said, is either sadness that arises from matters relating to my family, relating to my health, relating to my livelihood. I'm feeling the stress and I'm feeling depressed about my situation, how to deal with that. And then we dealt how to deal with sins that I've committed in the past that is making me feel guilty. That was chapter 26. 27 then dealt with a feeling of shame. If anyone really knew who I was, what I'm feeling inside my heart, they would look at me differently. So I'm feeling shame or disgust based on not a sin that I committed, but based on a feeling that I'm having, or based on the mind's way of thinking in my mind. And that's making me feel disgusting. How do I deal with that? It's pulling me down. It's making me depressed. Chapter 28 then dealt with when during prayer, when I'm trying to feel connected to God, at that moment, all these feelings is coming to me. It's like, when you're in the shower, you sometimes have the best ideas of changing the world. It comes to you in your shower and you can't jot it down. So during prayer is when you have sometimes on one hand, a close connection to God. And yet during that time, that's when all these lustful thoughts, God forbid, are coming up. So it shows that my whole worship is wrong. And the Alter Rebbe says it's not true. It's showing how powerful it is that when the animal soul is being knocked down, it tries to give a last sucker punch in order to get back into the ring, in order to get back up. So when you're feeling high, the animal soul is trying to push back with a similar amount of force. And then chapter 29, which is what we just finished with last week, in chapter 29, it deals with another problem. It's not sadness, it's a more dangerous problem. And therefore, the medicine for it has to be a lot more harsh. The danger we're dealing with in chapter 29 is not sadness, depression, it's actually apathy. It's the feeling of coldness, the feeling that I just don't care anymore. And that's a lot more dangerous. The feeling of, in Hebrew we said, is timtum, or being desensitized, was the word we use. And that's a lot more dangerous when my heart is blocked, when the inspiration that I'm understanding in my mind is actually not flowing to the heart, which is crucial in our service. And I'm just not feeling it. I just don't care anymore. That was chapter 29, where we quoted the Zohar that says, similar to a log that is not catching fire, it needs to be taken out and broken up a little bit. If your body, an animal soul, is not catching a fire from the godly soul, meaning it's not relating to it, it needs to be chopped up a little bit, which means the ego is what's getting in the way, and that needs to be broken up. And so chapter 29 was harsh. I won't sugarcoat it. We spent, I think, 5 lessons on chapter 29. You could go through the recordings, but I did give a disclaimer, and that disclaimer still applies for chapter 30, where this is not the norm. This is not something that we usually do. And our Rebbe actually said in the 80s that now we do need to still break our ego, but it's not broken with the same method and methodology that the Alter Rebbe lists out in chapter 29 and 30. We need to break it with an explosion of joy. So not with an explosion. The way over here is more an intervention of bringing down, pushing down the ego by showing just how disgusting it is. We said even the words, I think Nancy enjoyed this part of, like, yelling, saying you piece of nothing. I forgot the words in English, how it came out. In Hebrew, the words were you menuvel, you disgusting, I forgot the words, but there are some good words in English. A thunderous voice. You repulsive and wretched. That's the word I was looking for. You wretched. You're wasted. You're pulling me away from my relationship with God. And chapter 29. So it was a little bit intense, and it was harsh. When it's going through, basically the point was when the ego is not allowing the godly soul to shine through, you need to attack that ego by going through your archives. You dig into your past and realize and try to recognize what is it in your past or your present that is making the ego where it is at. Is it something from that you committed in the past? Maybe a teshuva that you did that wasn't up to par. Maybe it's a dream that you're having based on what you're thinking about by day. So it's harsh. Now we'll take us to chapter 30. So now, before just reading the words inside, I'll give you a little bit of a background. Does anyone have any questions on so far? So that's, I don't know how much you appreciate always doing a review, but I enjoy when we start a new chapter, really having a review just to see how we got to chapter 30. But chapter 30 now continues in this context of a little bit harsh, bringing down the ego. But it continues with a fundamental lesson, as Robin was saying before, of not judging others. Or to quote the Mishnah of Ethics of the Fathers, which we're studying now during these weeks anyway, which is be humble in front of all of humanity. This means that you should look at somebody else, that when you judge someone else, you could say, I'm on such a higher level of observance. My religious practice is so much higher than them. I'm doing pretty good in comparison to them. That's a very dangerous place to be in. When you look at others and you say, I'm better off, because that gives you a false sense that you're actually okay. You could always find someone that's less religious or less appropriate in their practice and in their observance, and say, I'm doing better. In truth, the Alter Rebbe says in chapter 30, don't compare yourself to their practice, compare yourself to their struggle. Compare your struggles to each other. And realize if you had their struggle, would you be able to maintain your level of service? So the Alter Rebbe actually gives a paradigm of a person who's not religious. And what does he deal with? Who is he surrounded by? To produce the results that he is doing, it takes actually a lot more struggle than what you're able to produce. I always remember this. We moved to Nevada 9 years ago. In our first home that we lived in, it was a great home. We had a bris of our first child there. But when we had to move out, the landlord wanted his house back. He was so rude. He didn't want to give me back my security deposit. I had to take him to court, and he ended up lying in court. I ended up getting my money back, but I had to And he even just walking to shul once, he followed me. He was just so rude, and I didn't know. I've never had to go to court before, thank God, but I didn't know people could actually lie in court. I thought you take an oath, and that means you say the truth. So I was shocked that he was able to lie. I had pictures to prove that he was lying, and it was a longer story. But what I left with was such an appreciation for people in the business world that have to go to court and take people to court, or lawyers that deal with these type of things all day, for them to remain, what we say in Yiddish, a tefach hecher, to remain a step higher and not get stuck in the lies and counter with another lie and saying they're doing it anyway, I may as well. And you could get so easily caught up. And it's not just in the legal world, just in business and just in stores, competition. It reminded me just how thankful I am that I'm not surrounded with people that are just looking to bring you down or compete with you and at all costs. And I left with an enormous amount of respect for so many people that I know in our community that deal with this every day, and yet are not bogged down by it. They remain higher. And I have a beautiful appreciation for years since the story happened. I don't know, 7 years ago. But the point that he's saying is, you don't know the struggle that someone else is dealing with. He even goes through examples. The example, I'm just going to. The point is that, and I'll give you the example. Take, for example, benching. Benching is what we do after we have bread. It's a pretty long benching. It's 4 blessings. It's called the grace after meals. In Yiddish, it's just known as benching, which means blessing. And for me, I could rattle it off in Hebrew. It takes me a few minutes. But for other people, it takes time. And not just the time and the struggle with the words that they're saying. It's also the internal struggle that they sometimes have. They're like, I'm not interested in doing this. For me, it's how I grew up. I eat bread, I bench. For others, they're like, why am I doing this? I don't even understand what I'm saying. Or I could understand it because I could say it in English, but I'm not interested in having these blessings. And yet they're still doing it. So I don't know what the struggle someone else is going through. I may be coasting. For me, it's easy. It's comfortable. It's what I'm used to. For others, it could be something that's extremely challenging. So for someone to still do it with a struggle that they're going through is a much bigger deal. It's almost counted like 2 benchings in my book. So I can't compare myself to them and say, look, I'm doing better than them, because what they have committed is actually worth a lot more. Another example, this past Shabbat, once a month, the Shabbat before a new month, which yesterday was a new month of Iyar. So the Shabbat before, Chabad has an instruction from our Rebbes to go through to read the entire book of Psalms. It's 150 chapters. It's quite intense. But when you do it from when you're 12 years old, reading the full book of Psalms, I know a lot of it. I'm not trying to pump myself up and say I know it all by heart, but I do Tehillim, I do Psalms daily. So it takes a few hours. But I remember growing up, there were people that struggled in it. They would actually start not on Shabbat morning. They would actually stay up already on Friday night to get a head start in their recital of Psalms this once a month. And it's amazing looking back. These are people that struggled with it, but they still try to keep a certain level. And that's just more in a religious practice. But thank God in our community, I have so many examples of people that struggle and still try to push to be able to do something. It's absolutely amazing. So I could look at myself, I'm doing a lot better. But the point of this chapter is saying, don't compare yourself to their practice, compare yourself to their struggle. And it's a very powerful idea. The point that he's trying to get to is you're in your comfort zone. But it could be a lot harder when you try to get out of your comfort zone. And as someone who's struggling, and even if their practice is less, but their struggle is a lot more. Just for example, business. We know people that go every day to the city for business. And when they're there, they're confronted by lies. They're confronted by inappropriate images in front of them, and the struggle is a lot harder. Even just children, in Marin County, where I don't know if the word is we're sheltered, but we don't even have billboards up on the freeway. go down to LA or I think maybe in the East, not I think, in the East Bay, there's billboards and there's things that are trying to catch your attention. So the struggle is going to be a lot harder. And that's a very small dose, but just finish the sentence to realize that the struggle for other people could be a lot more. I hope I made that point clear. And just an example that we could all relate to, the Alter Rebbe will give it as well, is charity. I or others could easily write a check to charity because it's how they were raised by their family to be generous, by their parents or grandparents. They're taught tzedakah, generosity, philanthropy is part of who we are as a people. But not everyone was raised that way. Some people, to part with $5 is a much bigger deal than for someone else to part with $150. So it's not the quantity of what they're giving, it's the struggle in how they're giving. So I could say, I just gave $200 to charity. That person only gave $10. I'm a lot more generous. But we're saying over here, don't compare yourself to the practice, compare yourself to the struggle. That person, knowing what they went through in their childhood and the type of parents or grandparents, or even just what they went through themselves, for them to part with $5 could be a much bigger struggle than for you to part with $200 or whatever number. So for you, giving the charity is coasting. It's part of my comfort zone. But what we need to do, and here's the I'm giving some harsh words over here. We need to humiliate our ego. We need to bring down our ego. We need to break our ego. Sometimes our ego gets on a high horse and it makes us feel fine. It makes us complacent. It makes us apathetic. And what we're saying here is bring down that ego, break up that ego. And the way you're going to break up that ego is by humiliating it. What we called in the previous chapter is intervention. Going through parts of your archives of your past to realize that you're not as holy as you make yourself sound, that you have parts that you still need to work on. And that's going to unblock the blockage that's stopping, that's a stone around your heart that's not letting inspiration get in. So that's the emotional exercise. What's amazing is you're actually not confronting someone else and trying to interview them on their struggles. It's all going on just in your mind. You could compare yourself to other people and say, wow, their struggle is a lot harder than mine. I should start working a little harder. My ego is trying to convince myself that I'm doing well, but we have to work on it. That's chapter 30 in a nutshell, but let's see it inside. And I didn't even check. I don't think I saw any questions. No, I think we're good. I guess that means everyone's understanding what I'm saying. I'm still trying to understand myself, but will be, if you're looking in a book, it's going to be on page 340. And I think, Cheryl, you have that, you're cracking open the book. So it's page 340, which is chapter 30 at the bottom. I'm also going to bring it up on the Kindle. Just my weekly warning is just going to make a sound. I think the audio automatically is turned on the Kindle. So as it's pulling it up, it's going to start that. The section is called Why Others Should Make You Feel Humble and how not to judge others. Okay, any questions before we dig in? Okay, my plan is to do this in 2 weeks. As stated in the Holy Zohar, see and... There we go. Okay, my plan is to finish this between this week and next week, so we'll see how it goes. I'm going to share my screen, and you're welcome to follow along either on the screen or in the book. And of course, you're welcome to either unmute yourself to ask a question or to type in a question, and I'll try to get to it. Chapter 30. This chapter, which did not appear in the original manuscript versions of the Tanya, and was added by the author, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, to the first print edition, offers an important lesson on remaining humble and not judging others. Also, take the following to heart. Try to fulfill the teaching of our sages of blessed memory. Be humble in spirit before everyone. So this is, there's very similar quotes like this across Torah, and even just in the Mishnah of Pirkei Avot, which we're studying on Tuesday nights at 7:30, the ethics of the fathers. But this one comes from chapter 4, which is be humble in before everyone. Everyone is a very specific term, right? It's not just in front of your family. It's not just in front of people holier than you. In front of everyone includes man and woman, Jew and non-Jew, everyone equal. You have this mandate of feeling humbled before everyone. which implies that you shouldn't just act humbly, but you should literally and genuinely feel humble before everyone. So this is awesome. It's not just about our action, it's about the feeling inside of you. You should feel humble in front of them, even before the most religiously irreverent person, Jew or non-Jew. And that's a note from the Tanya that makes that clear. We're talking about everyone here. There's no better person that I feel humble in front of this person, not in front of this person. It's equal and the same humble that you should feel, not just act on, but feel humble equally in front of everyone. And the key to doing this, I'm on the next page on the Kindle, is by following another teaching of our sages, also from last night's teaching of our Pirkei Avot class. Don't judge another person until you have been in his circumstances. I think, Barbara, you read this last night. Actually, I'm not sure who read this one. It's Mishnah 4. But don't judge others until you've been in their shoes, because it's his circumstances that caused him to sin. It's his environment around his work. It's his way he was raised. For example, it could be that his work requires him to be around the marketplace all day, exposed to its negative influences and temptations. And at any moment when he is not doing business, he inevitably becomes one of those who sit at street corners, surrounded by gossip, and his eyes see every form of temptation. And when the eye sees, what happens? The heart craves. That's a Rashi from the book of Numbers. Well, I'm trying to remember, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm not mistaken, that quote from Rashi, okay, yeah, I'm not sure exactly where that quote of Rashi is from, but it says, when the eye sees, the heart craves. And the passions of his impulse to evil are ignited, like an oven heated by a baker, as written in Hosea, which is a book of the prophets. It blazes like a flaming fire. So it's a long paragraph, but the point is that the reason why that person is the way and behaving the way they are is because of the circumstances, being around the marketplace, that they're doing business, but at times they could be doing business, and at times they're stuck in between business deals that they're just sitting at the corners. So the temptation is a lot stronger for them based on the surrounding, based on the setting that they're in. So this is quite different from a person who spends little time around the marketplace, and most of the day they're sitting at home. They're not surrounded with the same temptation. And it's different too from a person who's around the marketplace all day, but as can be the case, is not so easily aroused by his nature to seek pleasure, since the impulse to evil is not the same in all people. Some people have a particularly strong impulse to evil, while others do not, as explained elsewhere in chapter 15. So just to summarize, it's more what we say, in a good place. Awesome. And you know what, Barbara, we say actually, just reading your note, we say actually every morning, Al Tivienu Lidei Nisayon. We say it in our morning prayers. It's called Tfilat HaShachar. We say, don't bring me to the place of temptation. We don't want to be surrounded by temptation and say, now I know what it's like to be in a struggle and I'm going to overcome it. It's not saying go to Las Vegas and try to overcome temptation. What it's saying here is that you don't know how hard it is for other people, the struggle that they have. So you can't judge others until you're in their place, that their place is what's causing them to struggle. Their place is causing them to behave differently. And therefore you can't judge them. So you can't compare yourself to them and say, I'm doing better than that person, because you don't know what's really happening to that person inside. So this is a cool disclaimer. The Alter Rebbe now goes through a disclaimer. In case one of these people that's in the marketplace is going to get a copy of the Tanya, they almost have a green card and say, look, the Alter Rebbe excuses my behavior by saying, look, it's because of my place that I'm in, and therefore I'm fine with doing what I am. The Alter Rebbe says, no, don't use this as an excuse for the person found in that place. This is just what the person who's feeling apathetic needs to know and think about, but the person stuck in that place also needs to work on themselves. And that's the next section. The Tanya is quick to clarify that this argument of judging people favorably due to their circumstances doesn't excuse sinful behavior. It just helps you to understand it and soften your judgment of it. Now, in truth, even a person who is very easily aroused to seek pleasure, and his work does require him to sit at street corners all day, exposed to all sorts of temptation and negative influences, has no justification for his sins. And the moment he sins, he is classified as the complete Rasha, like we learned before on page 143, since there is no trepidation of God before his eyes. So if you don't have reverence, trepidation of God, then a sin doesn't seem so bad. But if God is in front of you, all day you see God in front of you, then you won't be able to sin. So don't use that as an excuse for the sin that the person is committing out in the marketplace, because that person is a Rasha at the time of the sin. While some situations may be more challenging than others, ultimately, we all have free choice over our actions and should never excuse our own sins. For he should have restrained himself and taken control of his heart's pleasure-seeking urges due to the trepidation of God who watches over all of his actions, as has been explained above in chapters 12 and in chapter 17. Since inherently, this is the beautiful line that we reviewed, and naturally in every person, the brain rules over the heart. That was a fundamental teaching from chapter 12. So even that person, when they're in the marketplace, he should be able to control himself. So I hope that part is clear. If there's any questions on it, I'm going a little bit quick through it. But of course, if anyone has any questions, the theme over here is you don't know the struggle of another. And therefore, don't compare yourself to another and say, I'm doing so much better, I'm fine the way I am, because every person has their own struggle, and their struggles could be a lot more intense and a lot harder based on the setting that they're in, based on the way they were raised, etc., etc. Okay, section 2. Are you fighting your impulse to evil? Now, to beat the impulse to evil, which is really the point of our Tanya, is we're trying to fight that evil, that animal soul that's bringing up the evil feelings, the evil impulses, which blazes like a flaming fire through trepidation of God, really is an enormous and difficult struggle. It's like a real test of faith. So I appreciate the Alter Rebbe acknowledging, on one hand, the Alter Rebbe in the past few chapters was saying apathy is a source of ego. Ego, as we've mentioned before, I forgot where I quoted it from, but ego stands for edging God out. Ego means the more of me, the less of God. And that is a very dangerous place to be in. You always need to have God in front of you. And the second you're feeling you're okay, I'm complacent, I'm feeling in my comfort zone, it leads to a dangerous place of being desensitized and timtum, feeling blocked. So we need to work on that. But the Alter Rebbe here is acknowledging that impulse for evil that rises in our heart is a real test, is a real struggle. We each know that feeling when you have a blazing fire, your heart is rushing and your pulse is racing, and because you have an urge to do something, and you need to be able to control it. So the Alter Rebbe is saying it's a real test, it's a real struggle. So let's see that. The real question is, how much is a person actively engaged in the struggle? External levels of observance tell us little or nothing about what is going on inside another person. This is so beautiful. You are in your comfort zone. So for you to be able to get up and join a Tanya class is a beautiful thing. But for someone else, you may think, why can't they just wake up and join? Or whether it's a minion, why can't they just give charity? For you, it's your comfort zone. For them, you don't know the struggle that they have dealing with it. What may seem easy for you, whether it's doing the grace after meals or saying a blessing before drinking a cup of water, for them, it may be a massive struggle. So for you, it's either you were raised this way or it's part of your routine, and therefore it doesn't take much effort. But we don't know what's the effort and struggle going on for someone else. So I gave you the review of this before, but now let's see it inside. And this, the Tanya suggests, gives us insight in how to be humble in spirit before everyone, since you don't know a person's struggle. What you do know for sure is that you could be making more effort. Therefore, every person must take into account his current standing and level in the worship of God to weigh and evaluate for himself if he is really worshiping God at the same level as those faced with the enormous struggle and tests mentioned above. People who are exposed to unimaginable temptations. What's amazing is you may be saying the words and worshiping Hashem for sure, but does that mean that because you're more religious, let's say, that your worship to God is more pristine? Their struggle, while their practice may be less, but the struggle, the worship in doing it may be a lot more intense, maybe a lot bigger. So it's a beautiful idea that you have to take into account that standing of relationship with God. I'm just going to see, I see on 343, if you have the book inside, I see a practical lesson on the sidebar. Unfortunately, it's not included in the Kindle until the end of the chapter, but I'll just read it over here. Always judge others favorably because you don't know their circumstances and the power of their impulse to evil. You're not living up to God's expectations if you are not aggressively fighting your impulse to evil, to have more devotion and less distractions. So a person, I think it's so beautiful, worship of God, living up to the expectation that God has for you, is a lot more than just doing the deed of the mitzvah. It's more about, are you combating, are you actively waging war against that impulse to evil? So a person could be giving $500 a day to charity, let's say, but they're not fighting they're still within their comfort zone. And one of the main parts of our worship is not getting complacent in our worship of God, not being in a comfort zone where I'm doing what I need to do, but it all is easy. It comes easy. That's not a good place. Complacency is something we're going to be, is not the main part of a worship. A worship means getting out of your comfort zone. For that person, they may be doing less, but the struggle may be more, and therefore their worship is more real. And I'm sure there's questions on this. Anyone, you're welcome to ask away, but until then, we'll continue seeing the words inside. This is both positive areas of do good. We're on the bottom of the Kindle. I'm going to turn the page. Such as struggling to worship through devotional prayer, pouring out your soul before God, which is what prayer is all about, literally. And I just need to tell you, the source for this is so beautiful. It's taken from the first book of Shmuel, of Samuel, the first chapter of it, in verse 15, the opening book of Shmuel, who later became the prophet to anoint the first kings of Israel, which was Saul, Shaul, and later David. He was the prophet to oversee all of it. But his mother, Hannah, which is my daughter's name, she was barren. And she went to pray in front of God. And on Rosh Hashanah, she prayed in the sanctuary in the temple, and her prayer was answered. So the description of her prayer was she poured out her soul in front of God. And it's amazing. We learn how to pray from Hannah, from this Jewish prophetess, and Jewish, I would call her even a matriarch, that taught us what prayer is. And actually, my daughter was born this past Rosh Hashanah, so we named her Hannah, because the reading of the day of Rosh Hashanah is Hannah. We read the Haftorah from the book of Samuel, the story of Hannah. Awesome. So I'm just going to read Barbara's beautiful comment. Taking all the weekly courses by you and Adina is like island hopping for me until the blessings of Shabbat, keeping me out of trouble and sin. Barbara, you're amazing, because when I look at you, it's amazing the amount of respect and everything you've been through and the challenges that you've overcame and the person that you've become, you are, is amazing. So, but that's thank you. That's we all learn from each other. Awesome. Okay, and let's see, so anyway, I'm sorry for digressing there about the verse, but just when I see such a verse of pouring your soul before God, really that's what we're supposed to do in prayer. We're not just supposed to be mumbling the words, but it's really supposed to be a worship, a service, a workout, literally with all your energy. As Sifri, which is a commentary on the Torah, teaches on the verse, you shall love God with all your soul, It means how much should we be loving God until the last drop of life is wrung out of you. Wow, interesting. As well as fighting vigorously against your body and its animal soul, which dampen your devotion. So the previous paragraph was on the positive efforts, meaning on prayer, on doing the proper worship of God, that it should be done with out of your comfort zone until the last drop of life is wrung out of you, which is a quote from Sifri. But also in the opposite extreme, which is fighting against our body and our urges of our animal soul, which dampen your devotion. I'm continuing now inside, to crush and grind their opposition to dust every day as a preparation before the morning and evening prayers. Interesting. So in the morning, we have shacharit, and the point of the shacharit is to fight vigorously against the body, against the temptations. And also the evening, we have to prepare ourselves to be able, the point of it is to fight against the evil. And then he just has an interesting parenthesis where he says the afternoon service, which is mincha, which comes in the middle of the day, does not afford much time for preparation. So we do have an afternoon prayer. It's called mincha, which we do before sundown. So in the summer months, we do it in the evening. So it's more towards the end of the day. But in the winter months, you have to pray by mincha by 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock the latest, because sundown gets so early. So he's saying since it's in the middle of the day, there's not much time for preparation in crushing the opposition, which is the animal soul. Interesting. And in addition to this preparation before prayer, also during prayer, you ought to exert yourself, toiling with your body to silence its urges, and toiling with your soul to become excited about spiritual things, as will be explained later at length in chapter 42. So in chapter 42, it's going to go through different meditations that we're supposed to have during prayer. Now is not the time for it, but the point of what he's trying to get to, I think, is that we're supposed to be utilizing the time of prayer, the preparation before prayer, to really toil to silence our body and the urges that are coming from the body, and also to get more enthusiastic and excited about the spiritual things from our soul, to listen more to our soul and to listen less to our urges and temptations from the body, from the animal soul. It is the extent of this struggle that determines whether or not you are actively fighting your impulses to evil. So I think this is such a beautiful idea, because it's not the quantity, meaning how much a person is doing, it's the struggle. When a person is prayer, you can have when a person is praying, you can have a person praying a lot less, but the struggle is a lot more, which means they're putting their whole heart and soul into it. Whereas a person could be praying a lot more, but they're cruising through the words without much devotion, and they're kind of saying the words while thinking about the latest film or the sports or their friends. So it's the struggle, the preparation. It's a beautiful thing, because for those that pray often, it's so easy to just get into a routine, and you always need to revisit your heart and see where it's holding in prayer, because the words are beautiful, but sometimes you get so used to it that it kind of loses its meaning. Like I could say I love you 50 times to my spouse, but you could either say it or you can mean it. And you could say something without the true devotion, or you could mean it without saying it as often, but the words are a lot more powerful. So I think he's trying to get to is the struggle, the devotion in the words is I may be doing it, but am I practicing it? Am I struggling in it? Are you actively fighting? And a person doing a lot less could be fighting a lot more in the struggle to accomplish what they are doing, even less than what you're doing, even if it's more. And any person, I'm on the bottom paragraph of the Kindle, and I think we'll finish. Cool. We're doing well over here. And any person who has not adopted this approach of fighting this difficult war against the body could not yet be described as fighting his impulse to evil, which blazes like a flaming fire. It's so amazing A person could be religious his whole life, and yet he's not considered fighting the animal soul. He's not considered on fire in his Judaism. A person could have just started today, and yet they are considered on fire. And they're considered spiritually a lot more advanced, because it's not the amount that you're doing, even though that's important. Of course, as Jews, we have a list of mitzvahs, of relationships with God that we are commanded to fulfill, but the struggle in it is beautiful. So it's pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. That's where the struggle is at. So Kanaya be described as fighting. He has not caused his impulse to evil to be subdued and broken through trepidation of God. A person might observe all the mitzvahs meticulously and pray in synagogue 3 times a day, and yet he has not even begun to fight his impulse to evil. The test of this is he struggling greatly? I think this is beautiful. You know, when you have a child that's very bright and they get good marks on their test, you can be so proud of them. But if they're not working, they're not struggling through it, and I'm not saying you should take away some of their intelligence, but you have to find the place where they are being challenged, where they are struggling, because that's where they're going to grow the most. They need to be challenged. They need to have a struggle. So a person could be religious their whole life, and kosher has never been a problem. And honestly, I have to tell you, shellfish and lobster and other things that people feel is their delicacy never tempted me once. I don't want to eat them. I don't want to even come near them. So I could keep kosher. That doesn't make me spiritually on a higher level than that person. Because what we're trying to look for here in chapter 30 is the struggle. That person that's holding back from eating that shellfish, their struggle is a lot more. Whereas I'm also not eating the shellfish, but I don't struggle in it. So you have to find the place where there is a struggle, and or at least over here, what he's saying is humble yourself in front of that person, because their struggle to not eat it is a lot greater than your struggle. So you may be advanced in your observance, but you maybe didn't even begin your worship. I love it. I think that's your fight to impulse, to control, to curb the impulse hasn't even begun.
So, Rabbi, if I may interrupt, there's a story that fits with this. There's a poor Yid. He's traveling. It's getting close to Shabbos. It's dark out. He can't get to the shul in time. He can't light a match to have a candle to guide his way. He says, "Dear God," he says, "I'm stuck here for the night." He says, "I don't read. Even if I could read the Siddur, I don't have one and I can't read it. I don't even know the prayers. When I was little, I learned the alphabet. If I would recite the alphabet for you, would you please put the letters in the right order for me and make a prayer?" And that was his great effort. And it was sufficient.
Lou, that's a powerful story, and it brings home the idea. You know, there was a story with the Alter Rebbe. I think it was the Alter Rebbe, maybe the Baal Shem Tov, one of the founders of the Hasidic and Chabad movement. That a similar story, that there was Yom Kippur, and he saw spiritually on high that there was a grave decree against the Jewish people for that year, and he was trying with meditation, and he was telling everyone to pray harder with more kavana to try to annul this evil decree. And there was one child there that he didn't know how to read. He was a farmer boy that never got a day of Hebrew lessons. And he was just, all he knew was to say the sound of the chickens and the roosters. That was the way he knew how to call. And he would say kukariku. And he was in shul by the Kol Nidre, and he was just singing kukariku because he couldn't pronounce the words of Kol Nidre. And that was his prayer to God. And the Alter Rebbe said the decree was annulled as a thanks to this young child who had such intention and devotion in his words. And so it's a powerful idea. And anyway, we'll conclude the lesson here. But it's when you look at other people, don't look at them and value the amount that you're doing versus what they're doing. Value the struggle and see where in your life you could actually work a little harder, push yourself a little more, give a little more, whatever it is, to find the place where you're getting out of your comfort zone. You're putting more of a struggle in, because that's where the worship is really at. It's a fundamental idea, and we'll continue next week. So everyone have a great